Hey, thanks everybody for coming back to hear more about Phil Woods. This is Phil Woods Volume 2. Will there be a Phil Woods Volume 3? There probably will. We'll cover some things that Phil did with some other bands, the Quincy Jones things and some of the other big band and other compilations that Phil played on, not under his name, but very important. So today what I want to talk about, I have maybe 4 or 5 records that I really like in continuation with Phil Woods 1, which is here. You can check that out. It's 2 videos ago. And then talk about some other 1 or 2 other records that either I just acquired or I just listened to, and a couple ideas I want to just talk about. And yeah, thank you all for being here. You know, the like and subscribe thing, if you can, that'd be great. Appreciate it. But let's get right into it. I'm going to try to hold these records up right today. I'm going to try to do the Mazzy method of holding records up. Nobody does it better than Mazzy. So thank you, Mazzy, for helping all of us out on this. So Phil Woods, we talked about 4 or 5 records in the first Phil Woods recording that I did a couple weeks ago. These go back, a couple of them go back in time as well. The first thing I'd like to show you, let me just put these down over here so I can grab them in kind of in order here, is Youngbloods. This is an original jazz classic reissue. And I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But this is limited edition series, OJC 1732. Youngbloods was done back in 1956 with Teddy Kotick, who Phil used a lot. Charlie Persip on drums, worked with Dizzy, worked with a lot of the bands back then. Donald Byrd plays really great on this on trumpet. I can't remember the tune. I think it's Dewey Square, where Donald Byrd really excels on this. You know, this period of Donald Byrd is really my favorite period of Donald's playing, much more so than when he got into the commercial money-making stuff he did toward the 80s and on, mid-80s and on. But that's another subject for another day. Al Haig is on piano on this. Just a very, very influential pianist back in that day. But the Youngbloods on Prestige Records. It's an exceptional record. I don't know the availability of this. You'd have to check. But even if you pick some of these up on CD, if you can find them, the price of these originals, this is not an original. Price of the original's got to be crazy. But this is the OJC reissue, and it's a really great record. Kind of a neat cover. I can't figure it out, but Phil Woods and Donald Byrd on Prestige, the Youngbloods. Phil did a lot of records with other musicians, as we figured out already, along with the Quintet and Quartet and other things. But Phil partnered up with a lot of players. One of the first other saxophone players that he started working with was Lee Konitz. Gene Quill. And Gene Quill was an alto player, East Coast alto player. And they did some records together. This was recorded, I believe, in it's right up here, 1957. This is a reissue of that on Columbia. It's a really good record. Gene Quill, it was a smooth player, a little smoother player at the time than Phil, but had a lot of great ideas. And they got along so well that they formed their own band for a couple of years on the East Coast, and they called it Phil and Quill. funny story. There was a club in Queens, I think, that they worked at, and the announcer couldn't figure out that it was Gene Quill and Phil Woods, so Phil and Quill. So he used to call it Phil and Quill, Anquil. He thought it was one person, but it was Phil and Quill. They did this record. It's a really great record with some standards. Night Tunisia's on this, and Daryl Stockholm's on this. And there's only 6 cuts, so they get to stretch out quite a bit. Two styles that were kind of the same in some ways, but sound-wise, kind of different, which just makes this really, really interesting. Bob Corwin on piano, I don't know, and of course the 2 sax players. There was not any bass or drums on this, which makes it really an interesting recording. This is a Columbia reissue. It's a promo copy, and I was lucky to find this, and it sounds really good. But Phil and Quill, very famous duo that Phil Woods had for a few years. They worked quite a bit on the East Coast. I mentioned Lee Konitz a minute ago in error, but Phil did a recording or 2 with Lee Konitz. This is a record called the Alto Summit, again on Prestige, and this, I believe, was from the late 50s. Not exactly sure of the year, but this is called Alto Summit. Pretty popular record. I've seen this around quite a bit, and it's not only with Lee Konitz, but Poindexter is on this. Wright, who worked at Dizzy, is on this. So Phil did a lot of recordings with other alto players, especially Gene Quill. He had an affinity, for Gene Quill. He was the best man in Gene Quill's marriage, and Quill. Not to regress here. We'll get into this in a minute, but one other thing about Gene Quill, as I think of this stuff, when you hit 100 years old like this, things come to you in different ways. Gene Quill, I believe in the late 70s, was mugged quite severely and lost his sight in one eye and was paralyzed on his right side. And he figured out how to play. Phil bought him an alto that he didn't have an instrument for a while. He was in really bad shape. And I guess he went and played a concert in New York and played quite well. I don't know if it was recorded or not, but that mugging really did Gene in, and died in the late 80s. Never really recuperated from that. It's a shame because he was really a great player. Anyhow, back to Lee Konitz. Lee Konitz came on the scene again in the 50s, like a lot of these guys did. And did a lot of work with Mulligan and I think Buddy DeFranco and some other bands in New York. But this is an interesting record. It was recorded. This was actually recorded in Europe with a European rhythm machine, rhythm section. Palle Danielson on bass, great bass player. Jan Christensen on drums, I don't know. Steve Kuhn on piano was a New York guy that moved to Europe like a lot of guys did. And of course, Leo Wright, Phil Woods, Poindexter, great name. It's a real name, by the way. And Lee Konitz. Lee Konitz is a great player. I'm going to do a segment on Lee Konitz coming up here. Real thinker, really great player. I always call him the Bill Evans of alto because he just played a lot of different lines and a lot of different ideas that other people weren't thinking about. If I remember right, I think Lee Konitz was on Birth of the Cool, if I remember right. I'd have to check that. But very influential player, and he and Phil Woods got along really well. On Prestige, original Prestige recording from Bergenfield, but recorded in Europe and released by Prestige back in the early 60s, I believe. Sometime in the 60s. Great record if you can find it. Good swinging record. Let's see what else. So Phil went to Europe in the around 1970, I believe, and he started a band in Europe called the European Rhythm Machine, and they were, essentially expatriates and some European players. People who I don't know of, but there's some there's electric piano, there's acoustic piano, there's electric bass, there's stand-up bass, of course, drums and some percussion instruments on this. And this is a band that Phil had for about 4 or 5 years in Europe. Did a couple recordings. Phil Woods and his European Rhythm Machine. They came to play in America to very, very good reviews at some of the big jazz festivals. This is on Inner City Records. Folks, anything on Inner City is recorded really, really, really well. And it's a really swinging record. And if you're into Phil Woods like I am, and want to hear what Phil Woods did for 4 or 5 years in Europe, this is very representative of that time. Phil Woods and his European Rhythm Machine. It's quite popular on Inner City. Really good recording and an interesting band. So probably the last, other than his Quintet and Quartet records, which I'll show a couple more. This will be a little. I'll tease you with this record. He made a lot of records with his Quintet and Quartet, which is Bill Goodwin and the pianists included Mike Melillo and Hal Galper and a couple other folks, and Steve Gilmore. And then Tom Harrell on trumpet. He added a trombone player for a while. And then Harry Leahy on guitar. But this record is a really great record. Kind of hard to find in good shape, I think. But it's on the Adelphi Jazz Line record label. And it's called the Phil Woods Quartet More Live. Acoustically, this is maybe one of the top 2 or 3 acoustically good sounding recordings, even though it's not an analog recording. It was done digitally and then mastered and put on vinyl, but it's a really good sounding record. Very, very good recording on this record. There's only 4 tunes, so they get to stretch out quite a bit. And of course, Mike Melillo is on piano, Bill Goodwin on drums, Steve Gilmore on bass. So this is the first quartet that he had. And they do Strolin and they do Milestones, the Miles Davis tune, and a couple originals. But recorded in Washington, D.C. It was done in 1981 on the Adelphi Jazz label. Really, really clean recording. And I think one of their best quartet recordings. This is prior to putting in Tom Harrell or the trombone player or Harry Leahy on guitar. But really done well. Whoever did the engineering on this, just did a great job. But super record. If you can find this one, this would be in my top 5 of my favorite Phil Woods record. More Live, Phil Woods Quartet. And again, Phil did a lot of playing with some other people, and we're going to get into that more in the next video. But I'm just going to touch on two really great records. Phil did a record with Bud Johnson. Phil was really influenced by Johnny Hodges, and that's again, people think it's Charlie Parker, but it's really not. He was really influenced by. He loved Johnny Hodges. He loved Benny Carter, even though Benny played a lot of tenor too and some trumpet. But Phil did a record with tenor man Bud Johnson. This was Bud Johnson's last record before he passed back in 1984, and it's recorded on the Uptown record label out of Poughkeepsie, New York, which is about 30 miles north of New York City. A couple doctors, I believe, started this. I don't think it's still around, but good recordings, and they recorded at Van Gelder's studio. This is done in Englewood Cliffs. And Rudy did the engineering on this record. Bud Johnson and Phil Woods. Phil was playing great on here, as he always did. And then Bud Johnson, the great tenor player, who has done it all, Bud Johnson. I always said Bud Johnson was a real cross between Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster. His great sound, really full sound, very, very melodic playing. Along with him on here was Bill Goodwin again on drums, George DeVivier on bass. Great bass player. You ought to look him up on Wikipedia and look at the recordings that George DeVivier's on. Again, this guy has played, you name it, he's done it. Great player. And Richard Wyans, a young Richard Wyans out of New York on piano. I don't know what he's doing these days. I have to look that up because I really enjoy his playing, and I haven't heard much about him. I hope he's still playing. But Bud Johnson and Phil Woods, the old dude and the Fundance kid. That's a real, I guarantee you Phil wrote the title for this record. That's right out of Phil's humor. But Bud Johnson and Phil Woods on the UPTOWN record label. Good sounding, good recording, great record. And again, there's always 6 tunes, 3 on each side, so they get to stretch out 6-8 minutes a piece. A couple standards and a couple originals. Great record. The old dude and the Fundance kid, Phil and Bud Johnson. And finally, last Phil Woods we'll talk about here today is a record, again, one of my favorite records that Phil did with the great Stephan Grappelli. This was done in the mid-'80s, I believe, in Europe. European rhythm section. John and Mark Facette is done in Paris. And the glue on here is Louis Bellson plays drums on this. They must have been doing a concert or some kind of a festival or something over there and went and did this record with Stephan Grappelli. You have to hear Phil play Caravan on this. And check out Louis Belson's playing on Caravan. Man, he drives this bad. It's like hitting the gas pedal and accelerating. And man, it's one of Phil's greatest solos on record is on this recording. And of course, Grappelli sounds great. If you have a good audio system, you're going to really like this because the violin is really, really, really well recorded on here. It's a studio recording, not a live recording, part of the reason. A lot of standards, on here. There's really nothing, no originals. They're all standards. All of me, Star Eyes, anything goes. Don't blame me. Caravan, might as well be Spring. Remember Jones, and just great, a great record. This you could find on CD earlier than you could find this on record. This is on the Who's Who record label, and thanks to a listener, and I haven't met him, but I consider him a friend. Stéphane Rissier from Paris told me that there's a sequel to this that I need to look for. And as soon as I get moved, it's going to be high on my list. I guess there's another volume with this group, and if it's anything like this, if it's half as good as this, it'll be a great record to have. But Phil Woods and Stephan Grappelli, I can't pronounce the name, but it's the only record that Phil Woods did with Stephan Grappelli, to my knowledge. Anyhow, a great record. Enregistrements 88 on the Who's Who jazz label, owned by Lionel Hampton, of all people. Okay, so that's enough for Phil. I just want to talk about, you know what, I'll save that for next time. I just want to talk about one CD last night. I did, Mazzy does this thing, Whack-A-Mole, where he goes in and grabs something and talks about it. I just last night just grabbed the CD. I needed to read something, and I didn't want to have to get up and change the record last night. I had to prepare something, but so I grabbed this CD, and man, what a great record. This is done on, this is an all prestige called Triple Threat, Jimmy Heath. And what's really interesting in this is Freddie Hubbard's on this, and Cedar Walton's on this, Percy and Tootie, Jimmy's brothers, bass and piano respectively. But Julius Watkins is on 4 cuts on this, playing French horn. Jimmy Heath, is from Philadelphia, tenor player, and a good player. You know, but to me, what Jimmy Heath's great attribute was his writing and arranging for small group. He was kind of like a Marty Page, but a lot hipper maybe in some respects, where he could make 4 or 5 horns really sound like an 8-9 piece band the way he would write these arrangements. What comes to mind is the Nat Adderley recording called, I think it's called Something Else. Not Something Else. Nat Adderley in the big sax section. Latifah's in now, Charlie Rouse is in it, 4 or 5 saxes. Oliver Nelson might be in it, I'm not sure. But it's under Nat Adderley's name. Jimmy Heath did the arrangements. And man, it sounds like a big band. As does this. And Julius Watkins solos on French horn on this. So talk about, some people have been talking about Ray Draper on tuba and some other instruments that are not really known in the jazz idiom, but Julius Watkins just plays really well on this. Back in 1962. And this was reissued on the CD I have is Original Jazz Classic CD. And speaking of that, I'm not going to go into it. I'm going to link Mazzy's video that went up today. And thanks to Ken Metcalf, who announced it. OJC, or Kraft Records now, who's owned by Concord, is going to start releasing some OJCs. And they'll start out with a few things. Coltrane is coming, and I think a Miles is coming. Just watch Mazzy's video. I'll link it on here. He'll tell you all about it. And Ken's, I'll link Ken's as well on here. But it's really exciting news. I'm not going to get excited. I am excited, but I'll leave it. Those guys already talked about it. Watch them. It's going to be great. Get out your credit cards, because here comes more good stuff. Credit cards and record storage. Just one more thing that I want to talk about here today, and I got this record today. Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm Section. It's a really good record. It really is. This might be a little controversial because I haven't heard anybody say anything bad about this recording session. And it's a good recording session. Art, I don't think it's Art Pepper's best recording session. I think there are better ones. And we'll go into that when we do an Art Pepper video. There's so many of them. This is exceptionally good, but there are some better ones that are exceptionally great. So what's my issue with this? Well, this record's been issued in about 10 different formats, and mono and stereo and whatever. And of course, I'm going to listen to this tonight. I'm sure it's going to sound great. It's a heavy vinyl, 180 gram vinyl, and Bernie did the mastering on this. It's part of the contemporary reissue series that we've been waiting for forever. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. It's going to sound great, all that good stuff. Just a little bit about this session from what I've heard and what I've read. Art had a lot of issues with drugs, and from what I heard, he was pretty strung out just prior to this recording session, and was very intimidated by the rhythm section. It's Miles's rhythm section. Miles is in L.A., I guess. Red Garland, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones is on there. And Art hadn't practiced. He wasn't at his peak. His playing is good. It's great. Some people say Art Pepper can never play bad. Well, you know what? Sorry. Everybody has some bad days. Art didn't play bad on this. I'm not saying that. He played good, but it wasn't some of his best playing, in my opinion. There are better. For some reason, I think because of the mix of Art Pepper with Miles's rhythm section, this record has become an iconic record. And it is. It's something that we all need to have and listen to. How many more copies do we need? I don't know. There are so many more contemporaries, and I'm going to keep doing this. You know, I'm going to be driving to Tennessee, and I'm going to try to drive through Salina, Kansas, and if I do, I'm going to stand out of Chad's office with a big sign saying, Chad, would you please release the Shelly Man at the Blackhawks in a nice box. There's so many other recordings of contemporary. We've been through that. Anyhow, if you don't have this, get it. It is a great recording. Art plays really, really good on this. I think there's some better Art Pepper around. Just my 2 cents. Anyhow, thank you all. And again, if you like what you hear, we're going to do another one here next week. And thank you for listening. Like and subscribe. Send a comment. Anything you'd like me to talk about. Be fun. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.